Serious. Doctors, how are you able to perceive a person in a sexual way if you've been trained to see the human body objectively?
I'm a nurse. Sometimes you don't. As in, you come home from work after taking care of geriatric body parts and you do not feel like sexy time. Your partner's body parts are just fleshy anatomy all of a sudden, and it's impossible to suddenly switch your brain into gear. But memory is a funny thing, that passes pretty quickly. 24 hours after that, you've completely forgotten about work and now your brain is looking at your partner through a very different lens.
It's like a switch, you might be looking at genitals but there's nothing sexual about it. I guess it's a combination of the amount of genitals and what people need help with. Usually something got stuck. More than often STDs and oozing. There really isn't anything sexual about that. But it still doesn't affect my personal relationships. I could be staring at my boyfriend's penis and it still wouldn't be sexual until we're about to smoosh booties.
This reminds me of a time when I was at the doctor's office and my NP, a pretty woman around my age, was with her, even prettier, nursing student, and they had to examine my balls with me standing in front of them as they knelt in the examination room. I don't think I'll ever forget the awkwardness of that moment.
I look at my patients very differently from how I look at a partner. When I look at my patients, I see a bunch of body parts that need mending, broken bones, gunshot wounds, butts that need wiping, whatever. Not to say that I don't look at them as a human being, I do, but they have immediate physical needs that are usually kind of gross, and I separating myself kind of gives them some dignity and me some room to distance myself from the reality of someone's foot falling off or whatever. When I see my boyfriend after a long shift, I see a whole ass person with a dick I could fall face first onto and a cute face that could return the favor, and it's a whole different way of looking at a person.
Former EMT. It's work. I am not outside me, I am work me and focusing on the problem.
I am a med student and I really want to know the answer of this question.
Context. It's the same for all humans. No one thinks naked bodies are sexual. We are trained to think naked people are sexual. Clothing is literally a social construct.
After seeing over 100 vaginas as a medical student in my OB/GYN rotation, I've learned a lot. The biggest thing was how variable women's anatomy can be. I knew people's anatomy varies person by person, but I was not expecting the range of differences. For example, some vaginas are much deeper than others and difficult to find the cervix when performing a speculum exam for a pap smear. Others are very shallow. Another aspect is the clitoris. I never had a precise idea where it was since I had never really spent a lot of time examining women's anatomy in a precise way like I did in medical school. They vary in size quite a bit among women. One of my patients actually used to be a bodybuilder and admittedly used steroids in her past, and her clitoris was huge, medically termed clitoromegaly. I can also now find it pretty quickly whenever I'm with a romantic partner, since pelvic exams give you a pretty good sense of the anatomy. Above all, I'm very thankful to all of the patients who were nice enough to let a male medical student examine them in order to learn more about women's health. I think it's made me appreciate how amazing the female body is and appreciate the differences among individual women I've been with.
I'm not a doctor or a fan of the flesh, but I would assume context matters.
Sexuality has a lot to do with lighting, presentation, and context. In a medical setting, you intentionally are draping people so that you only are seeing sensitive areas of the body when you actively need to examine them, and then covering them back up. You are likely in terrible fluorescent lighting, and most importantly, the person is probably sick or at least uncomfortable. Nobody is objective all the time. People aren't robots, and we see people in our personal lives as something very different than a patient.
Doctor here. A lot of good comments here, particularly the ones talking about how context makes a huge difference, but I don't think it tells the whole story. Some of the other comments seem to suggest that it's impossible to look at their patients in a sexual way, or that they are all a bit gross or off-putting to them in some way. That sounds a bit too robotic to me. Fact of the matter is that medical professionals get disciplined every year for inappropriate sexual activity towards or with patients. And I would say if any medical professionals are truly honest with themselves, they notice at least the occasional patient who is quite attractive to them. So what's the difference between these commenters, who I believe are being honest about not thinking sexual thoughts about their unclothed patients, and professionals who behave inappropriately? I would say at some point, likely very early in their training, they made the decision that patients are completely off limits to them sexually. This rule is strictly taught early on, but it takes an individual to really take it to heart and decide that a patient is in their head similar to a sibling, just simply off limits. A romantic partner is not in this off-limits category, and so the medical professional, appropriately, lets their attraction run wild and free. I'd be interested to hear what others think, but that explains for me a little more why context matters.
This reminds me of when I had my daughter. I had this nurse come in and do perineal massage to help prevent tearing. I had an epidural and couldn't feel it and couldn't really see exactly what she was doing, but from what I could see it looked like the world's most bored fingering session. It was just hilarious, in hindsight. I was actually really sick during labor, to have her just chatting so casually while doing it.
I'm only a physiology student, but if it were me, I imagine I would only view people as a doctor when I'm being paid to do so. Other than that, I reckon having an in-depth knowledge of the human body would only make it even better.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to subscribe to Upvote for the best quality content every day.